And before the show starts, we like to let viewers know that the values and opinions that are expressed on this show do not reflect the values of Close Look Productions. They're our values and ours alone. And with that being said, let's get started with episode 5!
Woo! Our milestone!
We did it! Oh
We're
my
still
gosh.
here.
We're still here. We're still killing it. You know, it's been awesome.
It has been.
Oh, and also I do have to mention we are sponsored.
Oh.
We have a sponsor,
Oh.
Surrey Honda. So you can check out Surrey Honda on 152nd and Fraser Highway for the latest deals and services. Go to surreyhonda.com. Okay, we're all done with logistics here. Let's get started with the show.
Yeah.
So, we have a very special guest, Kelsea Franzke. I've known her since high school, so it's really nice to have her on the show and to reconnect and have someone with a lot of experience come in and talk about the topic that we're going to discuss. So, what is the topic for this week?
The topic for this week is mixed races and how people in society can be more mindful and respectful to people who have different heritages, and also how these people can also kind of navigate their identity in a high school setting and also in a family group as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I think that people who do have mixed race identities, they're a really widely misunderstood group in our society.
Yeah.
And it's high time that we, try to figure out, the challenges, struggles, and strengths that they have as a community. So, again, I mentioned we have Kelsea Franzke on the show. Clap, clap.
Clap, clap, clap.
So she is, she finished a bachelor's in psychology and anthropology at UBC, and then she went back to school, being the keener that she is, in finishing her certificate in journalism at Langara College. She does a lot of things. She does some social media service for a company, as well as some communications, and she does freelancing. So we will definitely put her information in at the end of the show so you can get a hold of her. And the whole reason she's here is, she grew up in Vancouver, and her ethnic background is Chinese and German. And I personally follow her on Instagram, so she's always posting a lot of things about, social justice and, her experiences with mixed race identity. And that's the reason why I reached out to her.
Yes.
And here's the show. It's just, very organically happened, and we organized it, so.
We're here today.
Yes. Okay, we are back. Sanjana is off screen, and we have replaced her with our guest, Kelsea. Yay! So Kelsea, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I know, it's nice to talk about it, and then for it to actually happen very
Definitely.
organically. And yeah, it's really nice. I really appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about your, given that we are talking about mixed racial identity, can you tell the viewers a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I am Chinese and German. My mother's Chinese, my father's German. Grew up in Vancouver, have been here my whole life. Loving it so far, staying here so far. We are, yeah. And so both of my parents' families are immigrant families. So my father was born in Germany. My mother was born in Canada, but the rest of her family, or her siblings, were born in China and then immigrated here.
Okay.
And so, with all of that being considered, I do have a fairly small family. Like, my immediate family consists of my grandmother on my father's side, so my German grandmother.
Okay, and she's living here?
Yeah, she actually lives like a few blocks away from like the house that I've always grown up in.
Oh, that's
so that was so nice to have that influence
Very
of
sweet.
her being so involved in our life, and then also therefore the German culture being so ingrained and involved in my life.
Yeah.
Especially with food. Like, growing up, German grandma food is the best.
And it's authentic. Like, it's coming from your grandma who lived in the country herself, right?
Yeah, and food is so important when it comes to culture, right? It's such a key representation of a culture, and so that was amazing to have that there.
Yeah.
And then on my Chinese side, I have my aunt and uncle who have always been very involved in our lives, And then also my parents' sort of extended chosen family, who are predominantly Chinese, and then also have some like mixed cousins, like extended family cousins, which is really nice, which is really nice to have. So yeah.
So it seems like there is a big influence of both cultures. It's not just one that's overpowering or overshadowing the other culture.
Yeah. I've been really fortunate to have that balance when it comes to familial relationships and people who have been introduced to my life through my parents, and then also people who I have sought out in my social circles who are Chinese or German. And so having all of those influences as I've been growing up, it's been a really beautiful sort of mesh of the two.
Yeah.
And I feel that, you know, sometimes there's assumptions that one culture can overpower another, and there can be a loss of culture with that. But from my experience and from the experience of people who I've talked about who are also mixed race, that's almost never the case. It's always this like beautiful combination of everything. And I've been so fortunate to get the exposure to two cultures growing up.
Yeah, it is really beautiful. And I think, it really depends on the influence that your parents have. And what importance that they place on their own culture, or, even if they don't have a connection with their own culture. And I think our society tends to force you to choose a culture and say, which one is it? I don't like ambiguity kind of thing. Yeah. It's really nice to hear that, it's a nice, nicely wrapped. Okay, so given that not everyone is going to know about mixed race identity, especially as it pertains to Canadian society, I have come up with questions that only I know of, and we are going to do a speed round. And I want to test your guys' understanding of maybe stats about this demographic. I'm so excited. Like, I really want to know where your misconceptions lie. I know you have personal experiences, like as a lived person, as someone who has multiple identities from different ethnic backgrounds. But I want to see if you know the stats as well.
Oh, I'm so nervous. I feel like I'm gonna do terribly.
No, it's a learning experience. That's why I'm so excited. Okay, it's all at your guys' expense.
Okay, bring it on.
So, first question. What year did the U.S. Census allow people to check off more than one box for their racial identity, so then they would be counted as multiracial? Is it A, 1985, B, 2000, or C, 1995? Well, that was quick.
It's okay, not because I actually know it, but I feel like it was probably a bit later. So I want to say 2000. That's my gut instinct because people aren't very progressive.
It's 2000.
See, there we go.
And when I saw that too, I was like, really? Come on now.
Even for me, like, I think back when we were in like elementary school and there was like a first census that went around and I was in like grade 4 or something and I had to fill out some information and it would say like, what's your ethnic background? And I was like, well, can I put 2 on here? Am I allowed to do that? Because there was nothing clear. So I would always check other because there was,
sad.
It was really sad.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh.
Okay, number 2. When were the last laws against race mixing repealed in the U.S.? Is it A, 1921, B, 1982, or C, 1967?
Again, I'm not totally sure about this, but because this was with like the Loving Appeal, right? What's now considered like Loving Day to celebrate the like, mixed race marriages. Yeah. I want to say the 1962. Oh. Am I wrong? I'm wrong.
No, but there was no 1962.
Oh, sorry. What did you say? What was
So
it?
You're not wrong.
You say 60 something, right?
1967.
1967.
Okay,
I feel like that's.
Is that your final answer? 1967.
Oh, now I'm doubting myself. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's my final answer.
Okay, it is. Yeah, you're right. Oh my God,
Wow.
I'm being so
You're
mean to you
natural.
guys. Like, I don't know why it
You
feels
type
like how
these
to
up
be a
in your
millionaire.
basement.
Like you're gonna win money from
I
this.
know. I feel
so
like
sorry
I'm at
for-
least at 200,000 now.
I'm like increasing your anxiety.
You really are. I'm kind
so
of
sorry.
shaking.
This is the opposite of what the show's supposed to do.
Not relaxed at
Oh my
all.
God. Yeah. So 1967. So when the race, it's so weird, race mixing. When that law was repealed, that's actually when the biracial baby boomer era increased. So there was an increase in racial marriages and the rise in births. But with that being said, many states, they refused to recognize interracial marriage, and Alabama refused recognition until 2000. And this I actually got from Kelsey's Instagram post. I literally looked at it, and then I like kind of looked it up a little bit more, and I was like, damn, like this is crazy. But I also don't want to plagiarize. So
You have to give her credit.
I appreciate it.
So number 3. This is a survey from Canada, the National Household Survey in 2011. What percentage of the Canadian population are mixed race couples? That includes married and common law. Is it 4.6% of the population? Is it 8.1%? Or is it 1.5%? Whoa, your buzzer
so
is
loud.
so like professional.
It's great.
Such a professional buzzer. I want to say 8.1.
8.1.
Is that
I'm
even
so
a number?
sorry. No, it is a number.
Okay.
It was one of the
Yes.
choices, but I'm so sorry, you're wrong. Do you want to?
Can you repeat the
Rebuttal?
numbers again?
4.6%, 8.1%, and 1.5%.
I want to say 4.6.
Yeah,
I feel.
you're right.
Okay, it was a 50-50.
natural.
It was a
I feel
50-50
bad
chance.
now.
Well, I mean, I was thinking just generally about people who I know who are in like mixed race relationships, which I am. Obviously, my parents
Yeah.
and like other family members, and I know it's not super prevalent, but also I would be really sad if it was the like 1 point whatever percent. That would make me
Yeah.
really sad.
And it's only
be
keeping
sad.
in mind married and common law. So, you know, if you are dating someone or if you have been with someone for years, but
Right.
you're not living with them, that number would obviously be higher.
Right.
So yeah, it is 4.6% of the population. So that's 306,045 couples in Canada.
Wow.
So that's nice. And
that's
and that's
good.
risen since 1991. So
Oh,
Yeah.
it's nice. It's
That's
nice.
good.
Like
Slow
really,
progress.
it's very
Slow progress.
optimistic. But I do have to add, and this was in one of Kelsey's posts, that Canadian.
Stealing everything from Kelsey.
I should just say it's from me because I sound like so like research oriented.
so informed.
I know, but what I was saying was that even though there's an increase, negative Canadian sentiments still exist. Like I'm literally copying what Kelsey said, but there was a survey and it said that, and I think it was in 2019, so it was really recent, and they were saying that it was 15% of Canadians said that they would not marry anyone outside of their race.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, it still exists. I've seen it within my own family that there are some, I guess, what's the word? Like pushback when it comes to
Yeah.
trying to be with other races.
I totally feel that, like, in the South Asian culture, or at least in my family, there's a lot of keeping the same traditional values
Yeah.
that we have. So being exposed to, like, another culture group might dilute that or might not make it as visible in my family. So, yeah, it's not very accepting, but hopefully that will change one day.
I think it'll change.
I hope
It will
so.
be slow, but
Slowly but surely.
it's up to us. It really is up to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and as somebody who is in a relationship, like my partner is South Asian, I know when we were talking about like introducing me to his family, there was definitely some concern that there would be issues surrounding like
Yeah.
culture clash,
Yeah.
which we have seen unfortunately with so many people and so many people that I know.
Yeah.
Also friends who are South Asian
Yeah.
and marrying outside of the culture. In my experience, I've been so fortunate that my partner's parents have been so accepting and so welcoming. So that's amazing for me. But I know that that is a very common sentiment, and not just within the South Asian community, with so many communities.
Okay. One more question.
Okay.
Are you liking these questions?
I am. These are good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. So it's the last question. Mixed race adults with Asian background report discrimination at the same level as single race Asians. Kelsey?
I feel like true, but in a different way. So not necessarily discrimination from other cultures because you are Asian per se, but yes, from other cultures, but also from cultures or from the culture that you're within. So within that Asian culture, just because there's a sense of you being watered down and not being full Asian and not having those, whether it be physical traits or thinking that you don't understand the culture as well, things like that.
Yeah.
So I want to say the same just because it's from within your culture and outside the culture.
Yeah, it's true.
Wow. That was such a perfect answer.
Because when I was talking about this question with Sanjana, I didn't give her the answer.
Yeah.
And you said false. Yeah. Do you want to explain why maybe?
For
Why
sure.
it was false?
So I was thinking that so single race people, I feel like maybe weren't experiencing as much because I feel like, when you're from two different culture groups, there's obviously like a culture clash. Oh my God, can't speak. There's a culture clash, and also just I guess trying to find a balance between those two identities can always be tricky, and then having to explain that to your friends and also to your relatives from different sides of your family as well. So I found that there's a lot more, I guess, difficulty, within your own family, and also, I guess, the outside world as well, because you're trying to explain that to them too.
Yeah, I feel like that's like an ever omnipresent thing that you have to deal with is explaining your existence, like, you know what I mean? And it can
I know exactly what you mean.
Like, and it could be like just people being curious and people just like wanting to know like where your parents are from, but it's always like, what is it? Or give me your explanation kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I would say from my experience, people typically aren't malicious, like they're asking out of curiosity. But like I can honestly say any single person that I've met, probably within the first few meetings of them, it comes up. Somehow, most of the time not organically, people say, but what are you? Like, what are you? And that question in itself, that the approach to that question can feel like it leaves this bad feeling in your stomach, you know? Because there's this curiosity based on solely your physicality, right?
Exactly.
And the interest, not usually because like, oh, this is, you know, something interesting about you and I'd like to learn about your culture. Typically it's because like, why do you look different? And I can't quite put my finger on on that, and it bothers me.
It's really like you're racially ambiguous. And it's like there are definitely ways to like ask in a very like informed approach, like, you know, but then there's ways that are obviously like you can tell that they don't even know what they're asking is problematic, you know?
Exactly,
But there was one thing Sanjana and I were talking about, and we're like, you know, this mixed race identity, like, we also kind of, we understand it, and we also kind of live by it in the sense that we are also balancing, like, Western culture and then our culture, you know, from India. The difference is your added layer that you have a phenotype traits that physically you look like not as Asian or not as white. That's what it is.
Exactly.
And that's where the challenges lie.
Well, and I think it is really important to recognize that, people who have immigrant families who have come to Canada and live here, there's always going to be that balance that you're trying to meet of representing and embodying your culture, but then also learning and participating in the culture that you now live in, right? And so there's absolutely challenges there, and that should definitely be recognized. And I feel like it's very important to recognize that those challenges that people face.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so Kelsey, in terms of finding or navigating your way through your own culture and also being able to kind of address that to the outside world, do you feel the need to lean to one end of the spectrum, or do you find like a balance between both your culture groups?
I think it depends on the setting that I'm in. So at home, I've never felt like I needed to prove my cultural identity in any way. And I'm very fortunate to have parents who have always been supportive and uplifting of me experiencing and portraying my cultures. So I'm very grateful to have that experience. Although I will say, growing up and in school, there have been times where, typically when it's with a certain group of friends. So I remember in elementary school, I had this group of friends, and they were all these Chinese girls, and they various backgrounds, so Cantonese, Mandarin, or Taiwanese. And they were super awesome. I went to a fairly small elementary school, so there were 30 people in my grade. So you get to know everybody very well, so right? Yeah. And so there were these group of girls who I would love spending time with, but I felt when I was with them, because they were all full Chinese, I had to almost justify my existence within their friend group, right? And so when they were talking about things and experiences, sometimes I'd be like, oh, I don't relate to that, but I'll still laugh along. And I don't understand the languages, because unfortunately I don't speak Cantonese.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, I don't speak the language, but sure, I'll just nod and kind of pretend sometimes. And that, looking back, that's so awful that I felt the need to do that. And it wasn't that they made me feel as if I didn't belong, but it would just be things that come up in conversation, or interests, or food that you bring for lunch, or anything that makes you feel included or excluded, right? So those social pressures. And similarly, when I would be spending time with friends who are white, right? And I'd try to downplay my Asian background. And so, or if people said something that was, making fun of Chinese people or Asian people, I would just laugh along with it, because I'm like, oh, am I Chinese enough to say hey, that's not okay and that's inappropriate? And when I would stand up for myself, people would go, oh, but you're barely Asian. That doesn't apply to you. We're not talking about you. And on one hand, I'd be like, okay, they're not making fun of me. But then in reflection, it'd be like, but they really were. And making it seem like I didn't fit the mold of that minority group that they were making fun of is awful, right? In hindsight, it's really awful. So absolutely, to sort of sum up my answer, in various social settings, I felt like I needed to either downplay or draw attention to different ethnic backgrounds that I experienced.
Yeah. So sometimes you would have to kind of disregard certain aspects of yourself just to try to fit into a social setting.
Absolutely. You put it perfectly there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've experienced that as well, trying to make friends with people of different cultural backgrounds as well. And oftentimes it's difficult because you're trying to be friends with everyone, but people obviously have their own experiences because of their cultural background as well. And it's difficult to sometimes feel like you're neglecting a part of you as well. So.
Okay. Yeah. So there are a couple pathways in which people can reconcile with their identities, or the marginalization that they feel. One is basically accepting the identity that's assigned to them by the society. And that's often superficial markers, or, what you said, if a friend is, negatively reacting at your lunch, well, that becomes a part of your identity to not bring that kind of lunch the next day. The second one is to adopt an identity from both groups. So you did touch upon this. So in one group you act a different way, in another group you act a different way. Kind of a chameleon. Yeah. And then the third one is choosing one identity. So, you have two backgrounds, but you choose an identity, but you choose it for yourself, not based on someone else. The fourth one is actually integrating the two identities. And that's when you become an observer to figure out which elements of a cultural background are true to you. So which out of the four were you kind of abiding by, during your, I guess, elementary to high school, adolescent years?
During that time, I would definitely say that I was sort of changing my identity based on societal pressures. Okay. Right? And because, we went to high school together, there was probably a handful of people who were mixed raced, and it wasn't enough to make me feel like I was included in a group of people who were biracial or mixed raced. Yeah. So
it's not like you had your little group of that, and you talked about how does it feel to be like this? It's you fit in wherever you fit in.
Exactly, and you really try to, especially in high school, right? When all you want to do is to fit in and feel accepted. Yeah. So I think I definitely let my identity be defined by the societal pressures and the experiences that I had at that time.
Okay. So that's the first one, that's what I thought too. Yeah. Okay, well that's very interesting. So I guess our next question would be how have you kind of reconciled the two identities in your adulthood? Because our show is for youth and for young adults that are going through these conflicts of identities, kind of trying to figure out what is true to them, but also being in the state where they are still abiding by societal rules and, you know, what they think of their own identity. So to have someone on the show that has been through it, experienced it, and is on the other side is so effective for
Survivor.
Viewers of the show to see. So how have you kind of reconciled as an adult?
Well, I think when I was younger, the one thing that would have been so helpful would have been to have a role model who I could look up to that was mixed race. And, you know, as a child and a teenager, I didn't have that. I didn't know anybody who was an adult who was mixed race. So just to see like how, or to relate to experiences they had or like what they have learned. So that's something that I wish I had. And something that now as an adult, I hope that I can sort of provide that. I don't want to say role model and like toot my own horn, but at least the fact that you guys have even asked me to come here and share my experience.
Yeah, it's exposure.
And so if somebody in high school sees this and is like, hey, you know what? I don't need to pretend to be this aspect of my culture or this aspect of my culture. I can celebrate the two of them. And you know, if somebody walks away with that newfound understanding, I would feel so happy and so grateful to have supported them in that.
Totally.
I think something too is surrounding yourself with people who, although they may not also be mixed race and understand that, but people who are willing to have conversations and who are willing to hear you when you're talking about experiences that you have and to not just sweep them under the rug and to not believe them, right? So having people who are allies to your community is such a vital thing to have. And so as I've gotten older, there have been people who I am no longer in touch with because they have said some things that have been really inappropriate and really damaging. But I've made a very conscious effort over the years to surround myself with people who do try and understand and who do listen when I bring up issues relating to my ethnic background and things like that.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's great. Yeah.
And also, with that being said, sorry to cut you off.
No.
There is like surrounding yourself with your immediate social group, but also now in the age of social media, you can find so many people who can act as that role model or who you can look to understand their experiences and people that you can relate to. So that's such a wonderful resource to have.
Yeah, especially like just having people that can at least appreciate or acknowledge the struggles that you're going through and at least have the decency to respect your cultures as well and understand that as it is growing up is difficult, but then having to balance these two identities as well is hard.
It's important to have that recognition from people in your community to really understand and to try and support you.
So we already had this conversation, all three of us on the phone, but how are we going to deal with people who say, I mean, I've gotten this when I was traveling outside of Canada, but what are you? Like, what are you? How do you address that so that you are answering their question, but then you're also educating them at the same time? Because, you know, it's a fair question. They're confused as to, like, you know, they're curious. Maybe they're interested in, you know, which part of the country you're from or your family is from. But the way that they phrase it is a little problematic. So how do we kind of address that?
When I was younger, I definitely had a different approach to answering that question as compared to now. When someone would ask me that when I was younger, I would do anything to sort of just make them comfortable and then so we can move along. So I'd say, oh, I'm Chinese and German, but I am Canadian. I've grown up here my whole life and sort of move on and not say anything about it. As I got a bit older, as a teenager and sort of a young adult, it just drove me crazy. I was so annoyed by it because it was just this constant ask of me, right? And so people would say, what are you? And so then I would be sarcastic and be like, well, I'm a human. What do you mean? And then people would say, but what's your nationality? I'd be like, well, I'm Canadian. And what's your cultural background? And I'm like, well, I'm Canadian, but I'm also Chinese and German. But what you're trying to ask me is my ethnic background. And so I would definitely sort of have
Make it a little
that sort
hard
of
on them.
response. Yeah, because make them feel uncomfortable because they're asking me weird questions. Because it wouldn't just be, like, it's not just people who are friends and who you know. I've had random people come up to me and say, so what are you? And I'm like, I have no idea who you are. Why am I going to share personal information about myself? Yeah, it's really weird that people feel like they can ask that.
Yeah, but they don't realize, like, what effect their questioning has. They're just, like, you know, curious, or they don't see any harm in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, maybe it is kind of like a microaggression. It's a compliment to be like, I don't know what you are. You're so exotic. You look so different. And I was taking it as a compliment too when people would ask me, not that I mean, I look pretty Indian, but like I would get it once in a while and I would be like, oh yeah, like I'm Indian. Like, oh, you don't think I look Indian? Like, that is so cool. But it's really like when you really sit down and think about it, it's not okay to, you're kind of feeding into that world where, you know, this exoticism is something that we thrive for.
Well, and you brought up something really important, is this idea of exoticism, right? And so when people will say, oh, you're so exotic, and they think that's a compliment, like, it's really not, because you're ultimately reducing somebody down to, once again, how they physically look, and you're only interested because they look different, right? And so you become a novelty, and that's really what it is. And so for anybody out there listening, I don't know why people like to use that as a flirting tactic and say, wow, you're so exotic. Let me guess what you are.
Yeah.
That is the most annoying,
don't do
the
that.
most annoying thing you can do, because then you stand there and someone's like, are you Spanish? No. Are you Hawaiian? No. Are you Filipino? No, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I thought you were Filipino when I met you, but
so many people do. And that's okay. Like, you're totally allowed to think that and whatever it may be, but it's how you approach asking it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're learning about how people can often be a little demeaning or disrespectful in their approach to asking what your ethnic backgrounds are. So what's a respectful way of trying to figure that out or ask politely? Because at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of people can be maybe a little ignorant, but I don't think that their intents are malicious, as you mentioned with your experiences. So how can people approach that in a respectful way?
That's a really good question. And I think it's important to note that if it's somebody you don't know, just don't ask, right? Because it's personal information, right?
Exactly.
And so you wouldn't ask a stranger off the street a personal question if you don't know them. So just refrain from doing that. You know, if it's somebody who you know and you're getting to know them and you are curious, and that's completely normal and that's natural and it is okay to ask, but say, hey, do you mind if I ask you about your ethnic background? So first of all, the person can consent to, yes, they do want to talk about that, or no, they don't want to have that conversation.
They have a choice that way.
Exactly. And it's also important to actually use the words like ethnic background or ethnic mix or ethnic makeup. I think the safest way is just, what's your ethnic background? Don't talk about nationality, because that has nothing to do with ethnic background. Culture also has nothing to do with ethnic background. So stick with the words ethnic background, right? And so, yeah, as long as you're using the proper terminology to actually ask the question you're asking, then that's fine.
Like directly asking rather than using words you think are synonyms when they mean...
When they're really not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then to also ask if it's okay to ask that question, right? Somebody might not want to talk about that, and that's their right to decline having that conversation. There are so many resources out there and available to you through social media, on the internet, through academic resources. You should always turn there first. It's a quick Google away. It's really so easy to do. And then if you go there and you find your answers, great. You don't need to bother somebody. If you don't, then it's like, okay, who in my community do I know who I could potentially have a conversation with about this? And recognizing that people in ethnic communities or marginalized racial communities, they don't exist to educate you on racial inequalities and experiences with race. So always having that in the back of your mind. So when you do approach someone after you've done your research, after you've looked at the resources available, you say, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question about your experience with XYZ, right? So you don't want to outright ask the question, because some questions can be very emotionally triggering for people who have experienced racism and discrimination based on their racial backgrounds and their ethnic backgrounds. So always ask consent first and say, is it okay if I ask this question? Is it okay if we have a conversation around race? Because the last thing you would want to do is make somebody walk away from that conversation and feel like there's this emotional burden on them because they had to recall memories that they may not have wanted to.
It's been a doozy of a conversation. Doozy is actually, no, not doozy. Opposite of doozy.
Good things.
Enlightening.
It's been uplifting, awesome, positive, and very important topic to talk about. You have been amazing, just with your personal experiences, and you know your influence that's extended in your social media and in your personal life.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, if you want to get a hold of Kelsey, we can give you viewers her Instagram account.
Yeah. So it's at K Franzke. That's KFranzke. Yeah, you can feel free to reach me there. And thank you guys again for inviting me on your show and allowing me to use your platform to share my experience. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have had a ball.
Yes.
It's been so much
That's
fun.
what I was trying to say, not doozy. So thank you so much, Kelsey.
Thank you,
to
Kelsey.
us. I don't know why we thank ourselves every time.
We
thank
love
you.
ourselves.
Thank you, Dan, camera and video operator.
Yeah.
And tune in next Thursday at 6 p.m. And go get inspired, everyone.